Hello world! Frida Reba Darcy and Patricia O'Connor here on the bonsai balcony today. Oh, first things first. On the bonsai balcony today, we are going to talk about bald cypress, Taxodium Distichum. These are ancient. This is my compilation here of 3 trees, and I've had this little grouping together for around 3 years, more or less, over more than less. It satisfied my need to grow big trees. Also, I had grew up seeing these guys in all of their majestic beauty. I love the way their bases buttress out. The 2 on either side, they had buttresses too, but they were smaller. They looked like knuckles. They're below the soil. I hope they're getting bigger and more buttressy hidden underneath there. But to get everything at a usable height and get all of their roots in there, I kind of had to layer around. At some point when I replant those, I'll cut the 3 of them loose to where I can adjust their heights right back to soil, do a little pruning back of their roots individually, and then they will go back in there together, probably in that same order as the same grouping that they are now, and their pieces should fit back together, but they may be at different levels, and I'm kind of keeping that in mind as I prune them. These trees are not incredibly old. These are fast growing trees. Here in California, with our very tempered climate, they grow pretty fast. Where it gets hot, Florida, Carolinas along the coast and stuff like that, Mississippi, Alabama coast, Georgia coast, Texas coast, Louisiana coast, they grow incredibly fast. You can plant one of these in your front yard and see, measure the yearly growth in feet from an early age. You know, it's like all of a sudden you've got a 15-foot whip in your front yard. And in the 3 years that I've had these, you could probably go back to some of our earlier videos and see where all of the leaders on these trees were just sticks, just little sticks when we started. So this is how much they've grown in the since I've had them. Also, the wedge cut in the center tree, I did that with a handsaw, and then took the leader and then took the sprouts that came out of both of those and wired them up to make that a twin trunk. And so both of those, I've got 2 trunks now. I've got 2 apexes battling for girth and fatness and nutrients and all that stuff, and they're going to do half of a trunk apiece of the work. And so even though these came with a leader already started and their chops done, I redid the chop on the center tree and started their leaders over twice until I got one that was A, positioned where I wanted it, and B, came out after I finally learned a valuable lesson about bald cypress trees. These things are prolific growers, and it's a good thing. Some of the original trees on the planet, I mean, as far as evolutionary scale, one of the few things that you would recognize from a time when life kind of first started here would be a bald cypress. They predate insects. Most of the coal deposits, deep miles in the ground, consist mainly of bald cypress, dawn redwood, I think yew perhaps. But they predate, they come from a time when they had no predators. If you could go back in that time and walk on the forest, it would be climbing the forest, because there would be piled up dead trees on top of piled up dead trees, because there was nothing to eat them and nothing to turn them, and they wouldn't rot. They would just lay there, and trees would sprout or grow in amongst them and move them and push them out of the way, and then dirt would settle on them. And some of our first land masses were in a primitive earth, where it was mainly shallow waters, mostly everywhere. That some land masses may have actually been started by these guys learning to exist in shallow waters, and then basically making land mass with all of their needles dropping, creating bogs, and then the trees would fall with age or death, and so over time. But they're ancient. That's just basically a nice way of saying they're ancient. They are also one of the few conifers that loses their foliage in the winter, and so it can be appropriate to plant a bald cypress in a glazed pot. Normally, we plant evergreens in unglazed pots, and we save the pots with colors and glaze to them for those that lose their leaves in the winter, so that we can have some color to look at in the change of seasons. So this guy is currently holding down my little show hen pot. Now, I hinted earlier that they grow fast. They do. If you have one of these out in your yard, it will grow faster than if you have one in a bonsai pot. So if you're looking to ramify and chop a tree, and don't put it in a bonsai pot right away. Put it in something larger, a pre-bonsai pot, maybe something that looks bonsai-esque pot. But like these guys, their roots are not being restricted. This is many gallons of akadama and that's just so that their roots will, actually it could have been something bigger, so that the roots could have been chunkier. So the chunkier roots are kind of the opposite of what we would normally want in bonsai, but right now we're at a pre-bonsai state, and I've kind of figured out after the fact that what I'm doing is growing fine roots, but I'm growing them, a lot of them, and they're going to be fine because they're going to be going through that akadama. It could actually have been something larger and chunkier in this stage of the game, because we need to grow large, chunky pieces of wood. You know, I've got to make a branch that's this big fatten out to where it covers up the scar of a trunk that's this big. So fine roots aren't the fastest way to go about that. That could have been some sort of really large 1/4-inch granules or something big chunky thing of Boone mix or something, or compilation of, you know, chunky stuff. Also, the thing about these trees, the first year I had them, I didn't water them. I mean, I didn't feed them a lot. I was less worried about feeding them because I knew that that they needed to be fed, that we were looking at making a lot of lumber. But I hadn't learned about everything I felt like I needed to know about feeding bonsai trees, so I was kind of holding back. And I would say towards the end of that, they begin to lighten up in their color some. They do seem to really enjoy the LED lights. They grow straight into it. They don't, and they don't seem to be stretching to try to get into it. We don't have the high temperatures here that they're used to in the south, so I would still say that they grow fast, not as fast as what I've seen them. But helping that out to some extent is this oversized container, And we're just gonna, let them hang out in this for, however many years that takes, 4 or 5, whatever it ends up being. And all the while, I try to let the growth flush out in the spring and summer. If I see something that's gonna cause me a taper issue, like a handlebar branch, then I'll trim one of the 2 of those. If I see something that's called a windmill, which is branches coming out in all 3 directions from one spot, that'll make a big knuckle, and I'll cut that back to 1. And what I try to do is stagger the branches to where they're kind of like a ladder a little bit, not any 2 like this. That's what we mean by handlebar. But when it comes to styles of things that you can do with a bald cypress when they're in training, my intention with these is to make them 3 formal uprights. And a lot of times, if you were to search YouTube videos or just Google bald cypress bonsai, you'll see a lot of examples of what's really popular here in America to do, which is to do them the way we see them in the United States, which is called a flat top. And that's kind of like what these are naturally doing. The tops of these trees are out of frame, but if you look, when you see them next time on a video, or I'm swinging the cameras around going run and gun, which is my camera style, I guess, you'll see that there's a lot of times there's 2 branches on the top kind of doing this. And in a mature tree, maybe the top gets torn off over a hurricane or something, and in one summer it'll shoot this huge, tall, 20-foot shoot coming out that has, there's the root mass below the soil to sustain it, because there was something up there growing before. And it'll grow a new top really quick, and then it'll grow as tall as it can and maybe lean over a little bit. And then there'll be 2 branches coming out like a fork in the end, just like when we prune our branches back here. If we prune them, it'll bifurcate off. And a lot of times they'll do that, and over the end of the summer, instead of those just becoming fronds and then turning into something in the winter and dying off, that's the apex of the tree. Both of those guys will harden off and become branches, and then from then the following spring they flush out with new branches, new babies of their own, and that's the top of the tree. And that's called a flat top. And you'll see that cypress trees will readily make a flat top style tree. And on one hand, that is a beautiful and elegant style of trees. If you want to see good examples of somebody who practices flat top style, I would say look on YouTube for John Gene Angel, and I believe Ryan Neal also has some example of flat top, and he even gets into the first time he saw flat tops. He saw these beautiful flat top American bald cypress at a bonsai show, and B, he was following behind a judge at this show who was absolutely dissing them for not conforming to the bonsai norms of style, as in flat top didn't really fit under formal, informal, semi-upright, upright, cascade. It didn't really tick one of those boxes. So you can find videos where you kind of hear the politics of that style along with that style. If you want to see maybe perhaps a good example of a bald cypress in a formal upright, which is what I intend to do to these 3, I would go to Weingart's. I would look at, not necessarily go to Weingart's place. It's in Florida. For a lot of us, that would be a long haul. But it is a nursery in Florida where they specialize in bonsai, and they have a lot of really cool trees that do well in tropical areas and stuff. I think some of their crepe myrtles are just out of this world. but they also are just all about a bald cypress, and they have part of their fields flood every year, and it's because of that late winter, early spring flooding that they grow a lot of their bonsai trees in the ground and allow their cypress trees to hang out there in the part of the field that's going to flood, and they get a phenomenal amount of growth in a few short years by growing a tree that's in a yard that spends part of the winter slash spring months in standing water. Now, bald cypresses, you can grow them in standing water. If I had to leave town for a couple of weeks, one method to keep this guy alive would be to put it in a big dish of water, but one that would only be about maybe that big. I would want it to be in a dish of water that I would hope wouldn't evaporate while I was gone, but I wouldn't want to flood the tree. You do see trees in yards or in fields or in real life that spend most of their time submerged in water, and it's like, how can this be? And you have to, once I think about it, what I imagine happening is, look how tall that tree is, and maybe imagine that its taproot is much longer. So maybe the taproot isn't submerged in water, it's going down to a place where the soil finally dries out and is at best damp, and maybe has bugs and stuff rooting around down it, biodiversity of life down there. So if it's in a bonsai pot, I don't think you could leave it deep in water and go off and leave it. I believe that would probably in time drown your bald cypress. I've heard of them being overwatered. I personally have never seen it because I was never trying to push that. But I do know that if you are the kind of person who thinks that you would like bonsai, but every once in a while you've got to be gone for 2 or 3 days, this might be your guy. You could get away with that. The drip tray, for instance, that it has, if you allowed water up to the bottom here while you were gone for a week or so, the tree would probably be fine with that. Some people think that the cypress knees that these trees make might have something to do with helping them to buttress themselves against current, keeping the roots from getting everything washed out in front of them. Other people lean towards the idea, which is a good way of saying nobody really knows for sure what cypress knees are totally all about. It might be that they need a ratio of roots that are above or in or out of water. It's like if the soil has become so saturated with water that the roots are just 100% standing in water, it might mean that they need to send something up above the soil line, above the water line, to try to change that ratio a little bit, because whether they can totally exist in standing water or not is a spectrum, kind of a thought. So yeah, watering these guys is the key. With a lot of bonsai, overwatering is the problem. With wisteria and with bald cypress, not so much. I think the part where you have them in a bonsai pot means that we're not going to have a taproot that can escape to drier soil down there, hundreds of feet below the surface, perhaps. So we have to watch how much. We have to allow for the roots to get air from somewhere. And when I say air, I don't mean necessarily oxygen. They breathe 3% of the air, which is CO2. When these guys would have started life, not only were there no insects to eat them, there would be no reason for the dead trees laying on the ground to rot. They wouldn't rot, they just lay there and pile up. But the CO2 was also twice as high, and that's why there were like giant mosquito hawks and Frida-sized centipedes and stuff like that. Kind of scary when you think about it. But at any rate, that's kind of, they're easy to grow. Whenever I first started growing these bald cypress and people saw them, I got well-wishers would say things like, "You're going to enjoy pinching those. I know I enjoy pinching mine." They are prolific. They put out branches to a prolific degree. It's very tempting to exercise. You know, it's like we have to watch what we do to our pine trees. We have to watch what we do to our maples. We have to watch what we do. And then we have these cypress trees that if you water them and feed them, they'll just go poof. And the tendency is to go, at last, something I can micromanage, you know. I'm going to knock 90% of this back into where it's a clean looking tree. And then when a little 10 sprouts come out of one spot, I'm going to go boom, 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 and get rid of them. And a couple of years later, you don't see those trees around anymore. You can actually shut down the conveyor belt. That is what they do in their uptake of water, and then they're converting it to nutrients, and you're passing it along and making branch structure and taper and all of that. You can accidentally kind of shut down the assembly line by robbing them of their energy. And who pointed this out was Ryan Neal. He was talking about people defoliating parties, and I don't know how much of that is necessary and how much of that's really a problem. But about the time that I looked at its cousin, the Dawn Redwood, and said, yeah, maybe I need to stop it. I've been kind of doing that with the Dawn Redwood. It was always the white mouse of my bond. I experimented more with it, and I was starting to kind of like what I saw, and I thought maybe you should stop being so reckless with that tree. And about that time, bam, we got powdery mildew, and it totally defoliated the tree, and it shut down that summer. And then the next year we had a 90-degree day that absolutely socked most of the. So I've been trying to fight back for that tree, and I've lost all sense of styling in lieu of just trying to promote all the growth possible to, you know, retain some state of vigor in that tree before I begin to turn around and start styling it again. And that actually caused me to stop and look at these guys and think about all of that anticipation of pinching. So what I do now is whenever I have, I allow it to bust out with everything that it needs, everything that it wants to put out, all three of them, everything they want to put out in spring and in summer. And I don't allow things that are going to cause me design problems later. I don't allow things that are going to cause knuckles or reverse taper, or I don't allow branches to go too long that aren't going to be part of the design function, so that whenever I remove them, they're going to cause design problems, right? So other than that, I allow everything else to grow its full length, and then we watch the change of seasons, and these bald cypress trees will start turning yellow, and then the foliage will start turning kind of a little deeper, kind of a very much a rust red. Beautiful foliage the last couple of years out of these trees. Feeding them seems to help that sugar, I guess. I don't know. Don't want to guess, but when I started feeding them, the fall colors were better in that, and in my Trident maple too, now that I think about it. So it's at that point I could start pruning back the trees. The foliage is no longer doing me any good, except for one thing: the view of those things, the three of them in silhouette in red, is absolutely beautiful. Especially from my couch, just to sit there and glance up at that is to go, oh my God, that looks so cool. And so I tend to let those, when the needles drop, then I go through. And what I go through and look at is I'll see a lot of branches that, like this year, when I go through, I'm going to see some branches that are long and straight. those will be the one that started in spring and I allowed to grow all year. Are they entirely too close to one that I decided to keep 2 years ago? Because the one that I will have decided to keep 2 years ago will already have its secondary and some of its tertiary. So if given a choice between the two, we're almost certainly going to stay with the one that we have a history with. So off that new branch goes. Speaking of the one that we decided to keep that already has tertiary, we're going to be looking at that tertiary and cutting that back to a usable level so that it can then become our fourth round. And then so goes it, more and more and more. We may see a few places where our new growth is actually in a better placement than some of our other branches, but probably not. In most cases, we're going to stay with the ones that we've already started establishing some our foundation work and our secondary and our tertiary. And that's the name of that. The more branches we have, the more forks we have, the more foliage we have, the faster we will improve the taper of these trunks, which is when this becomes basically this, we should come pulling up to a finished looking bonsai tree above the soil. It'll be at that point that I'll pull that block of probably pretty tightly used up substrate of akadama. I'll cut the trees in between them, those blocks of akadama, cut the bottom off the roots, tease those back, fan that back, and replant them in basically the same spots, but with a lot of root reduction in a shallower, beautiful, I'm thinking at this point probably glazed pot that will be sort of thick because they're going to be sort of big. And they will continue to be kind of like what we see here, except you'll be able to see the branch structure better because it won't appear overgrown. And we'll be able to see the trunks better because they won't appear to be overgrown. And these will be formal uprights. There is a site in England, I'm having a hard time remembering the name of that site. The gentleman has a bonsai studio in England. No, it's not Heron's, but he has a bald cypress, and it's several years old. It's got some age to it, but it's planted at a slant, and its canopy was cut rather like a maple, and it's absolutely stunning. I believe it's, if I recall, its base buttressed a little, which kind of went with the slant, and then it had a umbrella canopy to it, or a lollipop type canopy to it. It's unusual to see somebody do that with a bald cypress, but that was an example of what somebody would do with bald cypress if they hadn't been accustomed to seeing them, or whoever started and installed that tree just for whatever reason decided to go a different way. But what a beautiful tree. And it certainly, I would say, lent itself well to that. And so that just leads us to, they're pretty symmetrical. The difference, except for here, if you look, they're very, very similar to a Dawn redwood. I think the leaves are the petals on the fronds are a little thicker and are symmetrical to one another on a Dawn redwood. And on a bald cypress, they're more staggered, and they're thinner and lighter. Much lighter texture to them. Let's see, other things that you can get in trouble with I've seen people who peel back the bark on their cypress. They're always doing this, making this bark. And I've seen people who will go through and pick all of that back, and they will just look like gleaming missiles or something with their taper, and it's a pretty look. I've also seen people get that wrong and produce scars. You watch what you try to pull on a bald cypress. Also, where these cuts are, if the bark separates there, try to discourage that and keep that in covered in paste. If it starts dying back, I have seen people peel that back and they kill the top or the apex of that cut. So then the apex of the cut's up here, and now you're looking at a new leader coming out here trying to do it. You've got this weird bowling trophy looking thing. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but so watch out for that. I have one issue on this guy. Oh, what I was saying earlier about the chop. When I did the chop in the center of this tree with that V chop, I was able to count the rings, and that was 3 years ago, and that I counted 14. So this, with a base that is a foot across, is about a 17-year-old tree, and it was about this big when I got it. It's grown a lot in the top, but I wouldn't say it's gotten a lot wider. It looked proportionately about like this. The one thing that I have to be cognizant of, I don't know how much of this is in camera, but if you can see, I've got a base here that's exposed where this part of the bark is torn away, and I have a base here where this part is torn away. I have seen people who have this part of their tree rotted out. It's common to see that. If it happens, it happens. When I saw that on other people's trees, I started watering more, making sure that my water hit the substrate. I'm not trying to, I would like for the bark to wrap over these pieces and this piece of exposed so that I don't see any, I'd like for that to stay clean as possible without having that divot out where the wood rotted away. So it might be that wood hardener is a good idea there too. I hadn't really thought about it, but so far what I do is I just kind of make sure that I put the water pattern there for a minute. I would kind of wash the trees with the water can, wash the base of them, and once I started noticing and seeing those scars on other people's trees, I don't think it's a killer. I don't think it's necessarily a mood killer or a killer look. It's something that happens naturally to them in the wild too. But I'm kind of trying to avoid that. So for instance, I've got a little bit of curl back on this piece of bark, and I am not messing with that. Just let that stay there. In fact, it wouldn't be a bad idea to cover that. Originally, the tree was tied down, had a tie there when it was in one of those cement buckets. A lot of people will do that. They'll go to a hardware store and buy one of those cement mixing containers. And this guy was in one of those, and that's partly why I planted it in this bonsai pot early, was because that thing was coming to pieces on me. It was a big block of used up akadama that was coming to pieces. So I up-potted it, which was a big slab about that big, and then the root ball of this one and then the root ball of that one comes up underneath it. That's why their little knuckled buttresses are not showing. There's probably this much. On this one and the other one, there's probably that much trunk. You know how the first thing you do is expose the trunk? The good part's below the surface on this one, but it's in training too, so that's kind of the way that is. So that in a nutshell, I think covers most of the points to a bald cypress. Yes, you can grow them in a dish of water for an extended amount of time if you need to go away. No, don't submerge the pot. And don't submerge a bonsai pot or something that won't allow a tree with a taproot to, don't submerge a tree like that in water. You can still drown them. They do lend themselves to several different styles of bonsai, upright, and like I was also formal upright. Probably Cascade too would be really cool. They're just that laciness to them, and they were ancient trees. They love to be fed. Don't hold back on the water. This is not a tree to decide it's okay not to come home on the weekend. Your tree will be fine. If it's used to being watered every day and it's in a container to where in order for it to meet its needs it's being watered every day, don't not do that. Don't not do that. Yeah, that's good English, Patricia. Anyway, good thing we're not here for English studies. That's pretty much it. There are some really good sites out there to watch. The ones that I have enjoyed and learned a lot from was, like I stated before, John Gene Angel does a lot of cool work with bald cypress trees. You can see some beautiful, beautiful trees if you go to Weingart's, which is what I stated earlier, and also Ryan Neal at Bonsai Mirai has some beautiful bald cypress and pygmy cypress, which is a smaller version with slightly different foliage than the kind of juniper-y looking foliage, I think, if I recall. Anyway, that's going to be our spill on this beautiful day about bald cypress trees. Are really easy to grow. They are really easy to they're really easy to ramify. They grow fast in warm climates. They'll take all the water you can give them and plus a little, and they're just really rewarding trees. I would recommend them. I would recommend them for beginners, or I would recommend them for people who are wondering whether or not they can get started in bonsai. This is the tree where you can kind of get your feet wet and get going with, and live to fight another day in most cases until you know, as you learn. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you guys haven't already. Our next spot will probably be tonight. We'll probably drag some little unsuspecting pine in, maybe repot one that's in a milk crate into from a milk carton to at least a terracotta pot. That sounds like us. That's something we'll probably do tonight. So that's what's going on. That's probably what's going to go on next there. And yeah, like and subscribe if you guys haven't already. And thank you so much for watching.